Welcome back to the show. We do want to let you know that the following conversation deals with the subject of eating disorders. It may be triggering for some viewers. That being said, we are really, really looking forward to speaking with our next guest.
She's the author of a new, deeply honest memoir called The Skinny, My Messy, Hopeful Fight for Full Recovery from Anorexia. Sheri Segal Glick, welcome to the show Social.
Thank you for having me.
So, Sheri, this book takes readers along your fight to recovery from an eating disorder, but it doesn't shy away from using humor. And your eating disorder, I understand, started between the ages of around grade 6, grade 7, and continued into your 40s. So why did you decide to write this book now, and why was it so important for you to incorporate humor?
I'll start with the humor question. So for me, I wanted a book, not only the kind of book that I would want to read, but the kind of book I would want to write. Humor is so important to me, and it's the way I move in the world. So I would have had a lot of trouble writing a book that didn't have any humor. And I think people can say really important things with humor. So it's not like there aren't serious subjects, but I think that having some levity in there is helpful. In terms of why I wanted to write it now, throughout my recovery process, and certainly since even starting this, promoting the book, I've really noticed that there's so much shame and stigma around eating disorders, and they thrive in secrecy. And so by coming out of the shadows, I guess, and the more we talk about them, the less shame there is, and the more people can see themselves, and their loved ones, and their friends, and their children, and know that things can be different and better.
Yeah,
really interesting. So, Sheri, on the very first page of the book, you actually write and acknowledge the fact that your anorexia was, quote, typical. So why was that an important distinction for you to make off the bat, and what does that mean?
I think actually what I say is it's stereotypical. So it wasn't typical, and that's why I felt like I needed to address it, because people have this idea in their minds of what anorexia looks like, and it's generally, white women who end up in very small, emaciated bodies, and which is what happened to me. But that is actually not typical. I read a statistic, and I've read it more than one time, so and it wasn't like tweeted by Donald Trump. It was like a reputable source, and which said that only 7% of people with restrictive eating disorders are actually underweight. So I thought it was really important to shine light on that, because it's just, it's so much harder for those members of the population who really are struggling to get help or to even seek help, because there's the shame. And if you have to convince people that you have an eating disorder, and also, it's not just women, it's all genders, it's all ages, it's all races. So I just thought that was really important to address, even though because my experience does, it is kind of what you see in the media, but I wanted to make sure people knew that that was not the typical experience.
I think that's so important to illuminate, because you're right, we all have these ideas around things. And another thing that we all often think is that it's just sort of a teenage thing. So why was it important, or what do you wish more people knew about midlife anorexia?
Yeah, it's actually really typical. One more statistic and then I'll stop, I promise. But I read that 13% of women over age 40 have either eating disorders or disordered eating. And again, that's not just to say it's just women, but women are more likely to come forward and be diagnosed. And people who, eating disorders are biopsychosocial. So, which means that if you have the genetics for anorexia or restrictive eating disorder and you start restricting food, it doesn't matter what age you are, you're gonna develop an eating disorder. Also, you don't grow out of an eating disorder. So if you have one when you're a teenager or in your 20s or when you're a kid, if you don't actively recover, you're gonna have it for the rest of your life.
That's really interesting. I've never heard it put that way before. Another really interesting part of your book is you write that exercise as a facet of your eating disorder. And the problem is that people tend to admire and really applaud behaviors like exercise. And so, first of all, make that distinction. And how did you grapple with that?
Yeah, I think really only you know whether you're exercising for the right reasons or because you have a compulsion. And it certainly is much harder to recognize your own disordered habits and change your disordered habits when you are constantly getting accolades for this disordered thing that you know in your heart is disordered. hard, but people are applauding all the time. So, because you can be somebody who runs marathons and you do it for the right reasons and you can take rest days, or you can be somebody, you know, for me personally, I would say to people, oh, it's a source of stress relief. It makes me feel great. But actually, no, it was that I was so stressed out not doing it that I needed the exercise to alleviate the stress from not exercising. And then the stress would build right up again. So, you know, only you know what is healthy and normal. And it doesn't really matter what other people are doing, because even if you're doing a very small amount, if you're doing it in a compulsive way where you can't take rest days and you're sacrificing, you know, other parts of your life in order to exercise instead, or you can't accept trips or go away to a cottage because there's no gym, then, you know, it's a problem.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. There are going to be a lot of people watching right now thinking, like, does this, like, how does that feel? And trusting that instinct inside of yourself. In your book, you also talk about a stage of the recovery process called Quasi recovery. What exactly is that?
Yeah, and it actually wasn't even something that I understood, and it was something that I actually struggled with for decades, because I was acutely ill when I was a teenager, and then, you know, for many years in between, I actually thought that I was healthy, and then because things were so much better than they had been. So quasi recovery, you know, for me, it was an affliction of ignorance, but I think it's also an affliction of fear, because it happens to people who have restrictive eating disorders, and they recover up to a certain point, and so people are no longer worried about, you know, the way they look. Like we were talking about before, they might get accolades for their exercise habits or for their, you know, healthy eating, but actually you're struggling just as much inside. And it's kind of a misnomer because it's called quasi-recovery, which implies that you're halfway better, but you're not, because there's the same amount of sort of eating disorder noise going on in your head, but it's just more hidden. And even a little bit of an eating disorder is still, it really affects your life in every possible way.
Well, you know, with a lot of support and determination, and as you said, a good dose of humor, you've come so far in your recovery. So what do you feel that you've gained the most in your life from this recovery?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the reason I embarked on the recovery process, like, in addition to all the health things like bone density or whatnot, was presence, not gifts, but like full presence in my life, the ability to be present with my family. So I've certainly gained that, and also just the ability to do things. Like, we're going away to France in a couple of weeks, you know, with my 3 kids and my husband, and you know, I wouldn't have been able to do that trip previously because we're not staying places with gyms, and it's a very long flight, and I won't be able to exercise, and I don't know what the food is going to look like. And so just like these little life things that people take for granted are things that I just wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So it just feels like it's hard. Recovery is hard, but it's so worth it. So
Sheri, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. Really thank you. So the Skinny is available now, and to the lucky members of our studio audience, you're all going home with your very own copy.
Hey there, what did you think? Drop your comments below and join the conversation. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you can find more on everything from food and fashion to pop culture and current events. See you soon.